Well, now I can be asked what is exactly the difference between the idea of a distribution of the sensible and the theory of ideology. The difference, I think, is as follows. The distribution of the sensible is not a matter of illusion or knowledge. It's a matter of consensus or dissensus. To understand what consensus means, let us go back to the Platonic demonstration and to what apparently is a flaw in this demonstration. It is easy to understand that when you are in a place, you cannot be elsewhere. So far, okay. What's its trickier is how you recognize that the individual who is in this place has exactly the aptitude to be there and nowhere else. Plato, of course, had the answer. The latter, he says, is a myth. People have to accept a story or a lie. The story has it that God mixed iron in the makeup of the artisans, while he mixed gold in the makeup of those who are destined to deal with the common good and the public affairs. The story has to be believed. Now, the point is what belief means. Obviously, Plato doesn't demand that the workers get the inner conviction that a deity truly mixed iron in their soul and gold in the soul of the rulers. It is enough that they sense it. That is, that they use their arms, their eyes, and their minds as if it were true. And they do even more so as this lie about fitting actually fits the reality of their condition. Diaries of French 19th century workers. Those texts made a point very clear. The condition for the emancipation was not the knowledge of the logic of exploitation and domination. Nobody had to explain them anything about this. All was but too clear. Precisely, it appeared impossible for them to ignore it, to ignore the fact that they had no time. All their problem was to make the impossible possible, to reconfigure the way they occupied their time and their place, so as to get out of the belief of the as if, which adapted their bodies and their minds to that condition. So a belief is not an illusion to be replaced by knowledge. It's a consensus, a way of seeing and saying, of being and doing in accordance with the distribution of the position that puts you at your place. Now the opposite of consensus is dissensus. Dissensus doesn't necessarily entail material violence, but it always entails symbolic violence. Emancipation for those workers meant the attempt to get rid of the ways of being, seeing, saying, and doing that adapted them to their condition. And what their text first witnessed to me is the attempt to conquer the useless, to conquer the language of the poet, the look of the aesthete, or the leisure of the loiterer. It is the attempt to take the time that they have not, to go to the places where they are not supposed to have anything to do. This is why the book in which I try to capture their experience was called, as Neil Landry brilliantly explained, The Knights of Labor, or more accurately, The Night of the Proletarians. Because emancipation means the disruption of the distribution of the sensible, and the very core of that distribution was the division of night and day. I don't emphasize it because he explained it very clearly, you know. And so the point for them was to precisely to break the circle of night and day, to put off as long as possible the entry into sleep and use this time for reading, writing, and discussing, composing workers' newspaper or poetry, if not both of them. And it is, I try to show that the core of the process of emancipation could be located in that quasi-imperceptible interruption of the normal round of work and rest, allowing them to both prepare for the future and live in the present, the suspension of the old hierarchy based on the partition of time. Emancipated workers were workers who constructed for themselves here and now a new body and a new soul. The body or the soul of those who are fitted for no specific occupation, who just carry out the capacities of seeing and speaking, thinking and doing that belong to no class in particular, that belong to anybody. It is this affirmation that linked the apparently harmless practice of writing poetry with the creation of workers' newspapers, the capacity to build cooperatives of workers, republican barricades, or organizations for war class. As emancipation entails a reconfiguration of the sensible word, it dismisses the classical oppositions between the means and the ends. The time of emancipation makes no opposition between the present and the future, in the same way as it makes no opposition between lived experience and strategic designs, or between the discovery of private life and the construction of collective forms of life. One of those workers, so the well-known now well-known in India, Gabriel Rockhill, invented for himself a counter-economy for everyday life, a counter-economy where all budget items, food, clothing, etc., were calculated to both minimize expense and optimize freedom. The core of social emancipation thus appeared to be intellectual emancipation, which means properly the interruption of the logic of the we can't, the affirmation of the equal capacity of anybody to live any life. But it must be clear, that the point is not only to say I can or we can. The point is to equate this affirmation, I can or we can, with the affirmation of a capacity which doesn't belong to any specific individual, group, or class. Emancipation contrasts the egalitarian presupposition or the egalitarian belief with the pedagogical logic that represents the poor people fettered in the chains of ignorance and proposes the help of science to lead them towards the promised land of knowledge and equality. And this point was made very strongly by Joseph Jacotot, to whom I dedicated my book, The Ignorant Schoolmaster, but now you already know everything about Jacotot. I just remember, this kind of radical turn, that he made, at a time when all decent people, in France or in Europe, worried about the best way to educate the people so that they could slowly, progressively get out of their situation of ignorance and servitude. It turns the whole matter around. Equality, is said, is not a goal toward which well-minded educators must lead the people, starting from their situation of inequality. Who starts from inequality will arrive only to equality. So equality, in order to replace ignorance by knowledge, the progressive pedagogist must always run one step ahead of the ignorant and confirm the ignorance and the inequality he is supposed to dismiss. So equality is a starting point, a presupposition that must be carried out by starting not from what the ignorant ignores, but from what he knows or she knows, from what he or she has or can have in common with the master. So there is no progression from inequality to equality. There is either the presupposition of equality or the presupposition of inequality, either the verification of equality or the verification of an inequality. Such is the logic of emancipation. My point is that this logic has been historically interwoven with and eventually subjected to another one in the socialist and notably in the Marxist tradition. That tradition, I think, reframed the struggle about the as-if as mere ideological illusion and turned the undivided time of emancipation into the strategic adaptation to historical necessity. It constructed an idea of subjection, featuring it as the state of a society whose unity has been split, whose richness has been alienated. Emancipation, thus, could be nothing other than the collective reappropriation of a collective loss. And it could only come as a completion of the global process which had separated society from its truth. And it could consequently only result from the knowledge of this process.